Okay, so we're going to do work on both of these models today. So initially, I'm just going to show you what I do for formers again. This is on the MiG in this case. But I just roughly cut out the shapes on the formers, and then I put some glue on the back. Sometimes I can use this glue. Sometimes I just use my regular, the white glue. This paper is actually kind of shiny and thick, so I hope this works, although they only need to be there long enough to use them to cut them out. And then while they're drying, I can work on something else. But I just do that. There's about 8 or so more formers to put on there, but we'll be cutting those out in succession. The little Nieuport, we're going to start working on its cockpit, just like we finished the cockpit on the, well, we're working on it too. Worked on the cockpit for the MiG. So first thing I did was, the seat has little holes in it, and they're perfectly fine the way they are as little black circles. They look great. The designer did a great job. However, if you have access to something like this, or if you have a drill, or you're careful, or however, this is this little hole punch my son got me. I use a 1 millimeter tip. Man, it makes beautiful quick work of this. And so I just go through carefully and punch these things out. And you punch about 5 or 6 and then push out the little paper. Punch out 5, 6, punch out the paper. And it works slick, and you end up with this beautiful thing with all these little holes in it. And it just adds some interest to it, makes it look a little more detailed. Now, one thing I found is it's going to be hard to match those holes up when you fold that over. It's supposed to be folded over, as you can see. But I decided, let's try something else. Let's just use a single thickness, and let's just color the other side of the one thickness. And I found a marker it's dark brown, but it'll be close. And so all I did here was color this in. And you could use paint, which would probably be better. You'll get a closer match, etc. But this is the back of the seat. You won't see it much. And what I do is add a little bit of this, and then I add a little bit of yellow, just to kind of make it look interesting. And now these are water-based, so it makes it kind of soft and gushy. So let it sit, let it dry. And then while it's drying, do other stuff. And that's wonderful. So start cutting out the formers. And again, I'm much more comfortable doing these kinds of things because I know what's in a Nieuport. I don't know what's in a MiG. Things make more sense to me on here. And then do the same old thing. Since this is a download that I printed on my own paper, this stuff actually works really well. This is sticky, shiny paper. It's just plain old paper. I try to make sure the grain is going lengthwise on a subject. And on something that's circular, I try to make sure that it's kind of diagonal. Especially if the wood is very thin, because if it isn't, you can crack things pretty easily. But in this case, there are the main pieces, and that's going to be what's going to start the interior. So that's cool. Now let's go back to the MiG. Here's a former cut out, ready to go. I get the appropriate piece here, the piece, and you see there's a little kind of like a scoop that's cut out of there, and that's going to be where that's going to fit. And when I test fit this, I noticed a problem, and that problem is my little former is too small. So when I put this together, and how hard I try, I'm trying to show you there's some gaps in there. And they're not gaps you can just get rid of, even if you push that top piece and that down. So here's a trick I do. I don't remember if I ever told people about this, but people have other ways to do it. But I just use tape. This is actually expensive to me, a tape. You should use like masking tape, so it's not as, and it's also a little thicker. But I cut strips of this, and I wind it around my former. I found when I'm doing paper modeling, it seems to me that the most accurate component is probably the skin. And so I cut the skin out and I fit the formers to the skin. So anyway, what I do though is this is, it's self-adhesive, so it just rolls around here, and I end up putting, a couple layers on at a time, and then check it, and then another layer, whatever it happens to be. In this case, I think this thing took about 3 layers of tape in order to get a nice tight fit. You want it to slide real nice and fit, so the glue will do its job. So you don't want to force it in, because that'll make puckers and dents and silly things on the surface. So you want to make it actually just be a perfect fit. If it's too small, you can force it in there, and it's easy to get in. But what you're going to end up doing is making puckers and creases and ripples where the skin is too big. And you can kind of force it on there, but it's not going to look right. And with this stuff being the aluminum paper, it's even more imperative you're careful because it'll really show problems. So you basically, this is a game of test fitting and putting it in and seeing how it looks. And so I test fit this again, and I still think I need a little more, but I'm just showing you that, I'm trying to match up the little vertical lines where things go, and that's pretty close, but I think it still needs a little more. So off camera, I added a couple more strips. Like I think it's about 3. Um, anyway, so here it is, ready to roll. I've test fit it 6,000 times. I got the tape on, make sure it sticks down there pretty well. And then I go ahead and insert it, and making sure that the piece lines up with the little dip that's cut out. I don't know what that is, but I assume that that's going to be something that has to be pushed down and glued into that little trench there. Put it in as best as I can, and then I will, and as usual, it always works better when you're not on camera. Put it as best I can, kind of get as even as I possibly can to line things up. And in this case, see that little line? That's where the center line is. I put that in, and I just turn it over like I usually do and just tap it down. Because if it's pressed down to the workbench, it should come up flush or really close. And that looks pretty good. Although I am trying to twist it a little bit to make it look a little better, make it line up just so. Later on, use some tweezers that actually work much better for this. But I'm just trying to spin it around and make sure it's flush. Because this will be, I guess, a butt joint. So it has to be good and flush. So close that down, make sure it's good. But it's much better than it was, and I saved the piece. The piece is fine. Now, since I did that, this one, and it's the front of the airplane, I'm going to go ahead and put a little super glue in there from the back and just put it in. You don't need to. You can use the regular glue, but I used super glue in this case just to make it strong and make it adhere quickly so I could move on. Quadruple checking, making sure it's flat, because if it's not, you'll have to sand it back, which isn't the end of the world, but you can then damage the paper. I had my zip kicker in order to get that stuff to dry post haste, and then that front end is done. And so the front end that front former needed some tape. It needed to be a little bit bigger. Again, it's easier to sand off formers or to add to formers. That's why I tend to just make all of the skins at one time. Now that piece needs to be, I guess it needs to be put down. So I use a little back of a brush to kind of carefully roll it. I don't want to crimp the paper because again, this silver paper will show every single mistake. So in this case, because the paper is thick, I am going to use super glue in that hole, in that little area, as opposed to the Aleene's glue, because it tacks quickly and it'll help hold the stiff paper. So far as paper has been easy to work with, it's not a problem at all, but it is noticeably thicker than, well, I guess less pliable. I don't know if it's thicker, but it's certainly less pliable than paper I've used in other kit models. But it also seems to be working okay. I guess we'll find out when we really start putting it together. But I'm just rolling that so that I assume it's supposed to be, concave in there, but I think it's supposed to be maybe, not symmetrical. Maybe it's supposed to be like just a little bit rolled on the end. And I threw a little zip kicker on there. There she is. So there's one section done. And, this part now is I'll show you how this one went in. Now this one has no tape on it. And this has got this little tab up here, which is interesting. And here I am looking to find, there's a little line that shows you where to line things up. And then there's the seam. And I'm just, see that there's a little white tick? I'm just transferring that into the center so I know where the center really is. And that little white tab is going to be interesting here in a second. We got to watch that when we're tapping things together, tapping things down. Anyway, I test fit this one, and I believe this one fits pretty close. I don't remember if I have to actually put tape on this one. Notice too, I cut out the centers, squares. They're supposed to be circles. They're cut out of circles, but it's easier to just cut a square out. But that's because you can go like this, and you can go from the opposite side and tap things in. Otherwise, you're kind of stuck. Plus, it's a place to grab. Now, I'm checking this to make sure it's okay. And I can't remember if it's good or not. I think it maybe needs a little tape. Because here I'm testing it, I'm pushing on the skins, and I'm seeing if it has a problem. And yeah, there's a little extra room there. And then I'm flattening that part down because that's going to be flat. But there is a little bit of pant sag there. So I'm going to use some tape on that and off camera and get it together. So now there it is, ready to roll. And I'm going to go ahead and slide it in. It's a tight fit, but it slides. I think some of the tape in this case kind of started to slide off, but it doesn't matter. I get it in close, and that tab, I have to be careful with that, so I put it over the edge of something, in this case my sanding block, so that I can push down and not break that tab. I'm not sure what that's for yet, but I don't want to smash it up. So anyway, I checked that, looks good. It's a little off center, and but you're really checking to make sure it's flat and it's flush, because again, this is going to be a butt joint apparently, and you want it to be nice. So I'm noticing I need a little bit more, a little help here. Nothing terrible. Now I put some glue on the inside, and then again, using a toothpick or a brush is a much better idea. But I put this in, and then I kind of tack it down with my trusty middle finger. And remember, when you put glue in, it also makes things slipperier. And so, it tacks, but it also makes things slippery. So you got to take that into account. So now I go ahead and stick this in. And by the way, if you put glue on your fingers, make dang sure that it's off your fingers, because you don't want to touch the outside, especially of this aluminum stuff, if you can help it. So here I'm putting this together, and I'm making sure it's flush, just like the test fit. You can see a little bit of the tape showing through, but that's okay. I can cut that off later. Just want it to be in the right place. Now I use these big old pliers, and I grab it like that, and it was very easy to just twist it like you're opening a safe or something. It worked perfectly. So I line those suckers up, nice and solid, nice and straight, and just make dang sure before it dries that everything is where it's supposed to be. All the edges are down. It's easier to use something long and thin. And I'm just touching the edges, feeling for the edges and making sure they're pushed up against there, so that now it's flat. And I'm testing, and it looks pretty dang good. So that's exciting. Now I'll do the same thing I did with that piece that was cut out like a little curve, a little scoop of some kind. But this case, this one's flat. But again, using a little bit of the super glue to get that in place. And I found a flat object that I could use. It's almost the same width. It happens to be a sanding stick. But I was able to sort of push that down carefully. And then, that applies equal pressure. And I think it turns out nice. Hold it in place, let it dry, and then you've got that piece done. And so what I'll do is work on putting these, basically doing this all the way down the line, and then we'll show, next time we'll show, I'm cutting off some tape. Next time we'll show putting the fuselage pieces together, and I think that'll go quick as long as they're even and they look good. What I didn't do on this one, which I probably should have done, but I'm trying to just put it together as it says, is because it's a butt joint most places, like these go together, you can see there's the little pieces cut out, and they slide right in like that. The lines seem to match up, by the way, for hand-drawn kit. They're very close. I mean, they're not perfect, but they're really close, and you can do a little fiddling around. But I'm really trying to make sure things are straight. I don't want this thing to end up with a tail that's cockeyed, because it will really show on a jet. You can get away with that on a Rumpler or a BE2 or something, but not on a jet. It has to be precise. Anyway, that's how it's going to fit, and I'll put some glue between those and hold them together. But what I should have done is each of these formers where they go together, cut them out at the same time, like I did with the ME410, so that then you have them identical. So now we'll go back to something that's more my speed, and we'll start putting the little Nieuport together. So there, the back of the seat, I rolled it with a paintbrush to get a curve into it. And that single thickness, by the way, looks fine. It looks just great. There's the base of the seat. Add a little glue to that, and it's easy to do. And just put some glue all around the edge, tap it in place, and then grab your seat back and pop it in. And I find it easiest to just set it down and then just hold on to the pieces and then put them in. Line up one end and then it'll roll around. And again, these are designed so well, and this one's computer designed, I believe, that if you line it up on one end and you've cut evenly and correctly, it should work pretty dang nice. So there's my seat, and it looks pretty cool. And it is nice to have the holes in it, like a Japanese aircraft from Second World War. They have holes in them. It's neat to have holes in these too. Um, and then I just realized there was a little piece there that was open with the wood, so I just colored it with my marker. And there's my seat. And I'll add, the kit has little seat belts. We'll do that later. Those lines are where the seat ends up going. It's going to be a stand it sits on, but that's kind of where it's going to go. Now, the rest of this is the seat, or the flooring here. This sits really well. It's got this little tongue, and the tongue fits perfectly into the little slot you can see on that other former with the black square in the middle. The black square is a cheat. That's just, that's supposed to be open and have stuff up there, but they just have it as a black square, and that's okay with me. In this case, I am going to end up putting some more stuff on the interior. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the rear. That's going towards the rear. I'm sorry. But it still should have something in it. But the seat will take up most of that space. Just make sure this is on, and then I turn it over to make sure it's pushed up against the base. And this fits just like a puzzle. Fits really nice. And then I kind of make sure that it's square as best as possible. The Mark 1 eyeball is probably good enough, especially for this, because it'll bend and move. You can when you start putting the skins on. But why not make it as good as you can? Then this second piece, I had to sand it a little bit to make it fit, but there's little lines that show you where it's going to attach to the lower floor. And you slide that instrument panel piece right in there. Then you dab your glue in, and I just put it on those two little pieces there, and then I'll turn it over and add a little to the bottom to make sure it's solid. And we just slide this into place. You can see the tolerance is excellent. Part of that is me being careful cutting it, but part of it is the model is designed really beautifully. It's simple, but it's nice. And even if you don't add anything, which we will add a few things in this, because there's a few things that are missing that need help. I push that up to make sure it's flat up against there. There's a few things in here that need to be changed or added. Throttle linkage needs to be done. There's some tubing or some wood, maybe it's tubing, on the outside in between those two formers. And I'm going to put some rigging between those to make it look better. And then there's aileron torque tubes. So there's a stick and rudder pedals that go in there, but the ailerons are actuated with torque tubes. And on the real airplane, you can see they're attached basically to where the joystick is. And I'll have to put those in because they don't come with the kit, but that'll be easy. But that's kind of where the seat's going to go. Looking good. So this isn't bad for an evening's work. We're slowly starting to get both of them moving, and we'll work with more cockpit with both. I'm not sure how the MIG cockpit's supposed to go in, but then we're going to add some details to this and keep moving along.